I started studying narcissism so that I could beat opponents in the courtroom. She thought it was all great. And then they were getting ready to go out for dinner one night with another couple.
You're not going to find answers in labels. Don't look for someone who's perfect. Look for someone who's willing to grow with you.
Push you all the way to the edge, and then they pull you back in with these promises that never come to fruition.
Out of place, out of frame, grow light on my face, same room, different shape, I don't break, I fade.
Welcome to the debate room that we do every Tuesday at 6 p.m. I have some rock star women that I'm very excited to have on. First, we have Rebecca Zung.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Thanks for having me.
Hi. So Rebecca is an attorney. She's also an author. You have an AI product. You deal in high conflict resolution. I love your YouTube channel. It's very popular. So you'll want to check that out. I'll put a link below. Can you give a quick introduction to yourself and why you would be an expert to speak on narcissism, which is what we're talking about today? Are we using the word too much? And also on high conflict resolution in general.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm known as the leverage lawyer. I've been a trial lawyer for more than 25 years now. I know I only look 25, but there you go. And I started studying narcissism and high conflict personalities from a completely different point of view than a psychologist or a life coach. Really, I started studying narcissism so that I could beat opponents in the courtroom. And I wanted to know how they thought, what they would say, how they think, how to anticipate what they were going to do, and help my clients get the edge so that we could get real results in negotiations or in the courtroom. So that's how I started studying it, really as an overlay to my background in negotiation and trial law. And I did high conflict divorce for many years. I'm also the founder of Slay AI, which is the first patented legal leverage building engine, which takes all of your scattered documentation, your incidents, automatically creates timelines, and takes everything onto a private platform and takes your scattered documentation and creates instant court-ready exhibits by finding the patterns of deception, manipulation, violations, discrepancies, that sort of thing. So it makes your attorney's job that much easier. So that's what I do now. I'm a USA Today bestselling author. I have a YouTube, podcast, all the good stuff.
Yeah, there's not a lot of lawyers that have jumped on board with AI. So I think that's really cool. It's probably just going to get better with time, I assume.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we launched it back just a couple months ago. We already have thousands of users. Of course, you know, the first couple of weeks we were finding all the bugs in it. And so my developer was going crazy, but it's definitely much smoother sailing now. We you know, people love it. I mean, we're already getting testimonials about the results that people are getting, and attorneys love it too, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, they have to start using AI, right? Until their jobs get replaced, which is not going to happen if they are using a product like yours.
Yeah. Well, ours isn't to replace lawyers. It's really just to make their job much more efficient. So that, because no lawyer wants to look at 35,000 screenshots and read your 5 years of emails and go through all your social media posts. Like, that's just not fun at all. So it just helps the lawyer be better so they can get better results for their clients. And I built it all on a private platform so that it would preserve attorney-client privilege and be able to, you know, work in conjunction with, so that clients and lawyers can work in conjunction with each other.
Okay, so check that out. I will be checking it out.
Yeah, slaypro.ai.
I'll write that below as well. Julie, so happy to have you too. Julie Menanno, she's also an author, a licensed therapist, and relationship educator. And you've been kind of known for attachment theory. Is that right? You know, I know you are. You really do specialize in attachment theory, and that's kind of what your book is about. Can you tell us in your own words, you know, about you? She also has a huge Instagram account. I like it quite a bit.
All right. Yes, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I use attachment theory to help couples heal, to help them. The theory is basically that when people are in a state of disconnection in a relationship where they have expectations of emotional care, their bodies go into a state of distress, and we can either, in that state of distress, we're going to experience feelings like fear and shame that are buried below the surface and come out as anger or just complete withdrawal. And what happens is partners don't know how to deal with those feelings. They never learned how to deal with them. And so they get stuck in these negative cycles that reinforce each other's insecure attachment. And then, by the time they're there and they've been locked into these patterns for years, that's when they kind of start to make sense of the problem in ways that we'll talk about today. So what I do is I go in and I help couples work through all of these patterns, figure out the pattern, what's happening really when we fight, because really what we find is they're having the same fight over and over. And at the root of that fight, neither of them know how to deal with their own deeper feelings, shame, fear, and unresolved grief. And because they don't know how to deal with their own, they act them out in the relationship, and then they don't know how to help each other with those feelings. And ultimately that just brings out the worst in partners. And so it starts to look like they're enemies of each other. But most of the time what's really going on is that the enemy is this negative communication cycle that they're getting stuck in based on, the attachment material underneath the surface. So I wrote a book, Secure Love, which walks couples through the self-help version of the work that I do in my private practice with couples, which is called Emotionally Focused Therapy. And then I also have a podcast where I walk real couples through 20 sessions of therapy for each season to kind of bring to life the work. I take a couple that's very distressed at the beginning of the work, and we go through this process and really allow people to see the attachment work come to life and be successful. And that's called the Secure Love Podcast. And like you mentioned, I also have my Instagram account.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm super happy to have you as well. Let's dive right in. So why should we care about, this is for you first, Julie. Why should we care about attachment theory? And, is this going to actually help improve my life if I understand, what attachment I have, what attachment other people have? Like, should we be doing this actively in our relationships and also our work relationships?
If you're having relationship problems, it's not just you, but people in general, it's enormously helpful to be able to make sense of the problem, because when we can make sense of the problem, we have, a roadmap for the solution. I personally believe, and professionally, that, attachment theory is the closest science has really come to explaining what makes relationships thrive and what makes them struggle and fail. And, I am not someone who really thinks that everybody needs to know their attachment style specifically to heal. In fact, before attachment style became, more of a household name, especially among people who are in kind of the self-help world, I never told my clients what their attachment style was. I just helped them heal their attachment insecurity between the two of them. So I think that, if we can move away from trying to kind of understand these styles and move toward looking at the relationship just from through a broader attachment lens, and recognizing that virtually every fight, no matter what's happening on the surface, has this emotional dance going on underneath the surface, where couples are basically only asking each other, the same question over and over again, which this is not my quote, this is a Sue Johnson quote, but it really says it all, which is, are you really going to be there for me when I really need you? And when couples can answer yes to that question consistently, not just that, they trust that the answer to that question will be yes consistently, they're going to be fine. That's a secure attachment. And, we need to learn how to speak the language of that emotional dance, which is the language ultimately of authenticity and vulnerability. And we need to know how to be responding to each other's authenticity and vulnerability with health. And what I found over and over again is that when we can teach couples to be successful in these places, instead of just, when they're triggered, going right into anger or frustration or withdrawal, the relationship symptoms will kind of start to improve on their own. That it does require, that both partners are willing to really dive in and understand their own emotional world and how that emotional world is just driving these behaviors that aren't working for them.
So I know some people who have kind of like figured out their attachment style, and they feel like it's given them the right ways to talk about it, and it has improved their relationship. But when do you think that, and that's also kind of a form of empathy, right? But when does empathy start to turn into enabling? And then Rebecca, I'd love to get your thoughts on this after Julie.
Well, bad behaviors are bad behaviors, and they're not going to work no matter how much we empathize or understand why someone is going into and dealing with their feelings in ways that aren't working in their relationship. That could be, lots of protesting when they're triggered, or anger, or trying to be controlling, or just shutting down or getting defensive when your partner brings up a concern. So I'm never a fan of enabling those behaviors at all. My heart and my work is about helping people understand, why are you needing to do these behaviors? What's going on? What emotions are you trying to deal with that you're attempting to regulate and communicate with these behaviors that don't work? But at the end of the day, if the behaviors aren't changing over time, we cannot have safety and closeness. I mean, if you can't trust that your partner is going to be able to show up for you when you need them consistently, and there will be a repair process when there are ruptures, nobody's nervous system is going to, this is nervous system work. Nobody's nervous system is going to be able to settle into the relationship. So not enabling will have to get to a point where there's a really clear conversation that, look, I don't know what we're going to do with this, but we need to face the reality that, like, we're not shifting out of this, and I'm not going to be able to feel safe and close here. That's the consequence. It's a real consequence. So now what are we going to do with this?
Rebecca, what do you think about that? Do you kind of look at this in the same sort of way from your attorney perspective?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously I don't look at it from an attachment point of view, but I look at it from a boundaries point of view, and also an identity point of view. And where is the intent coming from? If you're providing empathy because you feel guilty, or because you're worried that the person's going to leave you, or because you're hoping that they're going to eventually love you the way that you think they should, or something like that, then those are not healthy reasons to be staying in a relationship. And what I've seen, is that the manipulator, the person who tends to be the manipulator, takes advantage of that person who keeps giving and giving and giving, and then like they give them false hope, and they say that they're going to do things, and then that never comes to fruition. And so, what I always say is that narcissistic personalities, they keep you alive on hope. And so, you just keep hoping and changing and thinking it's going to be different this time, but then it isn't. And by the time they end up in a divorce attorney's office, there's resentment, there's anger, there's years that have gone by where they've given and given and given, and they're not getting what they hoped that they were going to. And then the problem from the court system is that they go to in front of a judge thinking, I'm just going to tell my story, and they're going to see how unfair this has all been. And the judge is going to, see it my way. And it doesn't work that way, because the judge's job is not to make that person whole. And so they end up feeling victimized again by the judge, by the lawyers, by the system. And it really just comes back to your own self-healing, which is what Julie is talking about, which is, do you feel whole and complete on your own and secure on your own, and not looking to make sure that other person. So I think that empathy can kind of be it's a difficult word because every single person has a different idea of what empathy looks like. But I do know that in these high conflict relationships, the manipulating type of person will manipulate people's empathy to get them to continue to be in the relationship so that they can control them. And that's where I think it becomes toxic.
Can you give us an example of false hope? What do you mean by that? Someone who continues to give false hope versus someone who is actually trying, like, where's the line?
Oh, I mean, I have examples from my practice over and over again, and I'm sure Julie has many as well. But, you know, like what I would see is I had a client one time where she finally decided to leave. It was a very abusive relationship. She finally got the strength together to leave. She's at her mother's. He comes by. I'm sorry. It's never going to happen again. You'll see, I'm changed. I'm different. I'll go to therapy, the whole thing. You know, he goes to like 2 rounds of therapy, maybe 2 sessions, and then it's all about her. And then all of a sudden it just starts to kind of creep back to the way it was before, or actually even worse, because now, you know, he's making her pay for the fact that she tried to leave. And she like thought that he had changed and it was going to be this whole new thing. And they kind of breadcrumb just enough. They push you all the way to the edge, and then they pull you back in with these promises that never come to fruition, you know. And so I remember her giving this example of where she thought it was all great, and then they were getting ready to go out for dinner one night with another couple, and under his breath he just said lipstick, because she had worn red lipstick that night, and she immediately had a gut punch in her stomach, feeling like, oh shoot, he's back. You know, the person who criticizes what I wear, what I look, how the makeup I'm wearing, that sort of thing. And all he said was lipstick, and she knew right away then that it was like he was back. So that's that false hope.
Yeah. Julie, how can we have the language to kind of work through our attachment styles, try to figure out if we can have a resolution, but then eventually understand if, you know, we are being led into this false hope area? Then are we supposed to detach, or like how do we think through this from your perspective?
Well, you know, the first thing I'm going to do when I see a couple, and first of all, if I see a couple, usually that means that both of them are willing to do the work. You know, not always, but sometimes we need to create some safety to get there. But, you know, the first thing I'm going to do is look at these negative communication cycles that they're getting stuck in when they fight, right? Or when they get in some sort of argument, or one partner brings something to the other and the other one just gets defensive or shuts down, and they're missing each other emotionally. So the first thing I'm going to do is figure out, you know, what's happening in these cycles and how are you both contributing? And what can we do to help each of you manage your feelings in a different way, and communicate those feelings in a different way? So we start to move away from these cycles and we do some damage control. And then once we get some damage control and things start to stabilize, then we want to start adding in even closeness and bonding, which we can't add in if they're stuck in these cycles all the time. And so what happens is over time, when you're doing this work and you know, if you start to see that one partner is willing and able to do the vulnerability work, but the other partner is really lagging behind or not really able to do that, that's when you have to start getting to the point where you really have to say, you know, is this working out? And, you know, as a therapist, the last thing that I want to do is breadcrumb clients, which is keep them in when the situation is really toxic and not safe for one or both of them, by saying, oh, we just got to try a little bit more. So there will be a point where I will say, look, you know, this is not shifting, and here's why I think that's happening. And I always say, like, we need to look at the evidence for hope. Do you have a lot of evidence for hope, or have you had experience after experience after experience in the past where you've had some hope and you went in full on and put your heart back in, and then you ended up being dropped again? If that's been your experience over and over, I need to understand why you're not really listening to that experience. What's going on with you that you're, you know, kind of, you know, staying stuck in a hopeless hope, right? So, you know, the majority of the time it doesn't get to that point, but we always want both partners to put some effort and as much effort as they possibly can into doing their part of the work, because we can't really see if our partner is going to be able to shift. And this goes for both partners if we're not willing to first do our part of the work to create a safer environment. And a lot of times what might look like very clearly on the surface that one partner is wholly to blame is actually really not the case. And, I don't want to ever invalidate someone who is actually in a very toxic relationship with someone who is not capable or willing to change. And that person could easily qualify as a narcissist. That's where I draw the line. Is this person capable or willing to change and look at their own stuff? But a lot of times that it appears that way on the surface, but once we start digging around, they're both actually kind of contributing to the issue in equal ways, but very different.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about the difficult personality types, a lot of people think now there's this use of narcissism is becoming overused. Do you both agree with this, or do you kind of disagree? Rebecca, what do you think?
I would agree with that. I mean, I've kind of personally, I've lately started moving away from the word narcissist in my, I did initially because it was like, as you had said before, like, oh, you get a lot of views or whatever, but I just decided it's just not even worth it for me. I'd rather use high conflict or narcissistic or something like that, because it is a diagnosis. And the way I like to look at it, honestly, is it really doesn't matter what they're diagnosed as. It's your experience of them. And if your experience of them is not serving you, and you know that it's not serving you, then it does not matter what they are called. And you don't need a diagnosis to know that you're not happy in a relationship. So if you know that you're not being treated well, you don't feel respected, you don't feel honored, you don't have a safe space to feel like you can share your feelings or create a healthy, loving relationship with this person, they're not the person for you, whether they're a narcissist or, a ostrich or whatever, it doesn't matter. And I do think it's overused. I mean, I can tell you the problem with it in the court system is that everybody is a narcissist now. And so the judges are just like, it's just noise to them. And so there's no point in saying it. And I really counsel people through my channel and through my programs to take your facts, create your leverage, tie the facts to the elements of the law that applies in your particular situation. So if it's a best interest of the child case, then there's 11 factors or 17 factors or 20 factors in your state. And you can take all your facts and summarize them and find the patterns that correspond with each one of those elements and make a case that you're the parent that should have more substantial time sharing or ultimate decision-making authority or whatever based on the law. And that's now when you're going to speak the judge's language, and you don't ever have to use the word narcissist. Mm-hmm.
I see you nodding, Julie. I have a feeling that you're going to say something similar. What's your opinion on this?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I couldn't agree more, Rebecca. I think that, you're not going to find answers in labels. You're going to find answers in your nervous system. And if you're walking around a relationship and you can say, look, I don't feel safe a lot of the time, and that doesn't mean physically safe, although that is a huge problem if that's the case. But if I just feel like, kind of on edge, walking on eggshells, or a criticism is coming at me at any moment, I can't really relax. Or if I reach to my partner with some sort of, legitimate concern, or I'm feeling emotionally uncomfortable, whatever, and I know I'm going to get rejected or shamed or dismissed or argued with, that's all you need to know. And then we need to sort of start working backward from there, which is, okay, this isn't working. It doesn't matter if we call it narcissist or borderline personality or ostrich. We need to work backward and figure out what's blocking this. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, what I found is most of the time it's a communication patterns that stem from, both partners' inability to deal with their own emotions and help each other with their emotions. Sometimes there is one partner who simply is not there. They're too consumed with their own shame that they're just not willing or able to look inward and do their own work. But I do think that, yes, the term is overused. People really are needing to make sense of their problems. And it can seem so accurate. You know, your needs aren't being met, you're suffering. And then you read these things online that say, oh, your partner is this. And you're sitting there going, my needs aren't met. My partner, you know, acts selfish sometimes. And it can feel really kind of validating and holding to read these labels. But, you know, the problem is that they can also really get in the way of pointing to the actual solution of the problem. And then, you know, to your point, Rebecca, you know, if you go into a court system and you start saying my husband's narcissist, they're probably just going to think you're crazy, you know, because that is kind of the narrative. Now, I would never suggest anyone go into a court situation and use that word. It's the word has gone from pathologizing the person who's supposedly the narcissist and pathologizing the person who's accusing them of being a narcissist. So I don't know if that answered your question completely. I feel like there's a piece I was missing there, but.
Yeah, no, it does a lot. And what's kind of too bad about it is there are definitely extreme like NPD cases that probably keep people stuck.
For sure.
But, you know, if people are just labeling everyone a narcissist, then it just gives away kind of that ability to label something internally and then be able to let it go. Unless, is there ever a time, Julie and Rebecca, where a narcissist can change?
I'll let Julie answer that. I mean, the only thing that, because I'm not the psychologist here, but I will say that just going back to overuse of the word, I think that the other problem with it is, you know, what I see from my perspective, and I teach people to be empowered in their decisions and to getting real results through negotiations. And that is that it puts the focus on the wrong place, which is on the narcissist and not on yourself and how you have agency and how you have decision-making authority and power. And it just keeps you held in victim mode that way. And I'll tell you this, and this is something I say webinars every single week, which is that there's no narc spray, there's no narc repellent or vaccine that you can get that means that narcissists are never going to come into your world ever again. So the only thing that you can change is yourself and how you can take ownership of your decisions in your life moving forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Julie,
I'll hop in here. Can they be changed? I mean, I think that if you really looked at the strictest definition of the word narcissist, what it really means is that this person is so disconnected from their shame. They're so disconnected that their defense mechanisms are so rigid that the shame itself is blocking, almost wholly blocking their ability to really self-reflect on their part of the problem. So if they were somehow able to look at themselves and self-reflect and say, yeah, I do kind of have a problem here. Yeah, I am kind of failing in these ways. You know, their shame would be so big and intense, and they would not know how to deal with it to the degree that it would cause a psychological collapse. Those are the people that it's going to be extraordinarily difficult, because the actual work of therapy is so terrifying to their nervous system, you know, almost through no fault of their own, that they can't go there. And their walls are so thick. With that said, you know, without fail, anybody who's ever come to my office with a partner saying this guy, or maybe even this woman, is a narcissist, has been able to do the work. And that doesn't mean the relationship was necessarily saved, but they were able to do the emotional work. So, you know, that again, you know, I do have a bias, because I get the people who are coming who are at least a little bit open, you know, to doing the work. But in my experience, the vast majority of people out there who are getting labeled narcissists probably aren't, and probably are willing to change with the right kind of help. And that last piece is everything. It's with the right kind of help. if you take someone who's a narcissist and you put them in a therapy where they're getting blamed, or we're just doing intellectual work and they don't feel safe and they don't feel heard and they feel pathologized, it's going to only make the situation worse. And then it's going to reinforce the idea that they're a narcissist.
Yeah, I mean, really, there is a difference too between someone who actually has the disorder, like can't put themselves in your shoes ever, like permanently, and that's a very extreme side. And then there's someone who's just an a-hole. It's like they don't have a disorder; they're just kind of rude, which
They're insensitive. Yeah,
maybe
just
you shouldn't be in a relationship with them anyway. But
Sure.
yeah, I hear what you mean. It's probably difficult. You're just labeling everyone that. Okay,
A-holes are pretty easily, a-holes can be changed. You know, once they figure out why they're needing to be an a-hole to what they're trying to regulate, and you can start healing that, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. I will say, like, they end up seeing like how it ends up self-sabotaging them a lot of times. And and I always say, don't let trauma do the talking, or trauma do the leading, or trauma do your picking, because if you do, it always leads you to a bad neighborhood.
I love it. I'll have to borrow that one.
you feel free.
Yeah.
So what if you're dating someone who's hot and cold, they shut down emotionally, they avoid commitment, or maybe they don't, but they're difficult in this way. Julie, what would you do in a relationship dynamic situation to figure out, can you walk me through what you would do with the figuring out their attachment and how you would approach that? And then Rebecca, I would be interested in what you would do from a law perspective if you're actually dealing with this type of person in the court of law.
Yeah. So, what you're describing is a situation where if someone's hot and cold, they're, you don't know what to expect. They're not predictable. Again, your nervous system will not be able to settle into that relationship if you don't know what's coming at you, day to day. And so we have to start there with, this isn't working. That already is set up to not work, because you can't feel secure. Secure attachment is a felt sense of ease in your body that is there most of the time, the vast majority of the time. And when it's not there, you're able to figure out what's going on. Let's talk about this, because I'm starting to feel kind of insecure in here, and like some things are going on that don't feel right for me. And you're able to work through that and make a repair and get back to that safe feeling. So if someone's hot and cold and you're getting a lot of mixed messages and you're not feeling right about it, that's your sign. This is not a safe relationship. Now the question becomes, well, what are we going to do about it? And that is the conversation that, look, I need to be in a relationship where I can rely on someone when their words and actions are aligned. And, when they're not just, making comments that are, kind of cutting or whatever, it doesn't feel good for me. There's so many things I love about you, we're compatible in all these areas and we have these great times together. And I really would like to see if we can work through this together. And then the $1 million question is that person willing to meet you in that and work on it with you? Because a lot of people grow up in homes where they don't know how to be in relationships in a healthy way. And they're hot and cold because they're dealing with the hot and cold is a symptom of emotional unhealth and within them that is being acted out as hot and cold. And if they're willing to explore that and figure out what is blocking me from being more predictable and consistent, I do believe anybody is capable of healing with willingness, with openness, and with finding also the right help, which is kind of a complicated piece of it. But if that person isn't willing to look at that, and the response you get is, oh, well, you're just seeing it all wrong, or, oh yeah, well, I'll change, but not really taking action to work on themselves. Or, what are you talking about? Like a deflection or just shuts down, refuses to talk about it. Those are all major red flags, because really we can get through a lot. We can heal a lot of our old wounds, and a lot of us are wounded going into relationships. So I always like to say, look, don't look for someone who's perfect. Look for someone who's willing to grow with you. The biggest red flag of all is an unwillingness to grow and get help growing.
Okay, so I've just seen Julie with my person, and we've tried to work this out, and it didn't work out. And so now I'm going to the courtroom.
That's so funny. I didn't know where you were going with that, but now I see. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what's happening?
That's good.
They
Okay.
weren't able to take responsibility. We discussed it. We found out they had, anxious attachment or dismissive avoidant, one of them. And we couldn't come to an agreement. So Rebecca, now we're in court. What do we do?
So one of them ends up in the divorce attorney's office, right? Or both in different offices. So I think there's a number of different ways that I see hot and cold. And that is first during that initial, what we call discard phase, right? And that's where you'll see hot and cold there, because that person who is the more high conflict person is going to want to keep control of the situation. So they're going to start love bombing again. And they're going to, even if that person's visited a lawyer, they're going to be like, oh, I'm nervous. I'm worried that they're leaving me. And so they might start love bombing and being all nice that we can work this out and and try to draw them back in. But what I have found is with the high conflict personalities is that you're either for them or against them. Everything's very black and white with them. And so once that switch gets flipped and they see you're against them, now you become public enemy number one. So now they want to take you down before you can take them down. And so now you're going to see the birth of the smear campaign. You're going to start to see using the court system as a sword and the children as a sword. They're going to use whatever they can, file false allegations, pleadings. You just feel like you're being like assaulted from every angle at that point. And the other piece that I see with the hot and cold is in the resolution phase, because they'll promise you that they want resolution too, and they don't want to spend a lot on fees and the whole thing. But what they're really doing is gaslighting you into believing that that's what they think, and they're really wanting to just maintain control and keep chaos in the situation. And so they'll continue to move goalposts. So even if they present a deal, an offer with all the settlement terms, the other person would be like spending 2 days going, I don't know if I want this. This is way less than I want, but at least it'll be over. And they go back and they go, okay, I'll accept all of the terms. And then by that time, no, deal's off the table. And they'll turn around and blame it on that person. Well, it's your fault because you delayed, and all of that. And so it's constantly, you just feel like you're going to get there, but then you can't get there because they're changing the terms. And that's where, you have to have leverage in order to incentivize them and motivate them to actually want to come to a resolution.
Arch Lending is building the most transparent borrowing experience in crypto. Get industry-leading rates from 8.49% APR, borrow against Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Solana, and receive USD or USDC within minutes. Your assets stay protected with qualified custody, no rehypothecation, and verifiable segregated addresses. As your collateral grows, unlock more liquidity, adjust your line anytime, and extend your term with a single click. And with 24/7 white glove support, you're never on your own. Arch Lending, simple tiers, public pricing, market-leading rates at every size. Check them out at archlending.com/debates. Again, it's archlending.com/debates. Use code debates to get 50 basis points off your APR on your crypto-backed loan today. Yeah, you made me think of a friend of mine who was in a kind of, I guess she was trying to get divorced for 8 years or something like that. And
somebody didn't have leverage.
He continued to kind of do what you described. So it would seem like they had a resolution, and then suddenly the deal would change, or he would say, never mind. And anyway, that was pretty clear cut. I think I think he had cheated and lots of other things. So it was pretty clear.
Well, that was her fault, of course.
Of course it was her fault. Of course. Well, in the court system, why you have a video out on why the gray rock method doesn't work. Can you describe what the gray rock method is, first of all? And then why doesn't that work?
You're talking about my video that I just put out recently?
Yes.
Yeah. So, so gray rock traditionally, not in a court situation or a negotiation situation, is just be like a gray rock, be totally boring, don't engage, which I think is very, very good advice. However, if you are in a situation like this, there are times when you want to do what I call fluff for favor, vomit later, which is you fluff up their ego to get a little something, you know, that give them something they want so that you can get something that you want, so that you have strategic communication with them, so that you're not just completely cutting them off. You strategically communicate with them in a way that every single communication you understand as a potential trial exhibit. So you use it to, you know, give them enough rope, you know, like, hey, if they were, if you ask them to change the schedule and then they don't respond, okay, now you can use that. Or they constantly ask you to change the schedule. Now you respond, but you respond strategically with boundaries. So I would call it a modified gray rock, because if you just completely cut them off, now you might look like you're the one who's difficult, or you might look like the one who's withholding information or withholding time sharing or whatever it is. And so you just want to be, I always say, remember that everything you put your hand to, whether it's a email or a text or any social post or whatever, is a potential trial exhibit. So just, you know, be careful and be strategic about it.
So Rebecca, I have a fake kid and I'm going to go pick him up. And I always am picking him up at the wrong time because my fake ex-husband, you know, won't change the time. So I've asked him multiple times if he can change, you know, the times that we pick up or the days. How would I do this in that situation? How can I fluff and come to a conclusion?
Yeah. So I would say, to be very careful in that particular situation, because what the court cares about is what was the last order. What did the last order say? And the courts they don't look kindly upon self-help, you know, like this, you know, where I'm going to just change the schedule on my own because this is what I think is right. The court really wants you to respect what that order says. And so if that order says pick up at 6 o'clock every night, then that's the time. And if you don't like it, or they won't change, or, you know, you've asked them to change, you can create, and this is where the incident tracker comes in and Slay AI is like, you can say, you know, June 3rd, 2024, asked to change the schedule. He said no. And then provide proof with the screenshot. And then now you're starting to create a pattern. So when you go back to modify that order, you can say, hey, there has been a substantial change in circumstances. We didn't expect that they would not, you know, cooperate with me ever on any changes, and showing them to be uncooperative while you're the one who's been following the letter of the order. That's how you affect change, through that court system. Because if you don't, now they're going to get you for contempt. They're going to go to enforce the order. They're going to try to say you're the violator. You're the one that's a problem.
Julie, when you're dealing with couples and you hear, you know, you're trying to get one of them to, I guess, take space or kind of do the gray rock, can you explain from the therapist's point of view what gray rocking is and if it's ever helpful in certain scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the gray rock approach doesn't work like big picture in a relationship that has an attachment, that where two people are still relying on each other for comfort and care, emotional support. It can be a way to get through a moment when our nervous systems are escalated. We're both scared. We're interacting with each other. We're new to this work. We're talking about a topic that, you know, we don't have the capacity to do right now, like new to therapy. It can work to kind of just take a break, right? And I always recommend that we do that break in a way to the degree possible, it's hard in the heat of the moment, but that's what we're in therapy learning to do. To be able to just say, hey, this is that negative cycle that's going to come in and get us right now. Let's just separate. Let's just take a break. I mean, that's the gray rock, right? It's not going into the content. It's not allowing yourself to go into reactiveness, but you're also not just stonewalling them, and completely shutting down. There is some engagement there. The engagement is, let's just take a break. Let's go regulate ourselves, because we can't co-regulate each other right now. But what Rebecca is describing is this relationship's over as far as attachment. We're not now in roles to help each other emotionally. That's no longer on the table. Now we're coping. Now we're in self-protection. That's appropriate when you're going through a divorce with someone, is protecting your own interest. I mean, not the expense of theirs, of course, but a healthy version of protecting your own interest, protecting your children's interest. So if gray rocking is something that works in that environment and it's successful, then we do that, but there are situations where that might not be successful. And, Rebecca's situation is called for. I think sometimes you have to, and I think you would probably agree with me, Rebecca, is kind of feel out the situation and see what is this difficult person most likely to respond to. Mm-hmm. And then where I would come in there is I would say, okay, we have the solution here. We figured out what the best way to respond to this really difficult person is for the greater goal of, keeping this relationship keeping this situation as successful and predictable and healthy as possible. What is going to get in the way of that person doing those things, whether it's gray rocking or this term you said that ends in vomit? Sorry, I can't remember the first word.
Fluff or favor vomit later.
Exactly. Because their nervous system is going to be so pulled when that trigger comes from their partner to go into reactiveness, to go into, well, I'm just going to dig my heels in or look at this, or to call the court in a panic. And so my work with that person would be, we need to help you be able to, in the hardest moments, put these skills into practice. Mm-hmm. Because what happens is if you're not doing the emotional work, you're not going to be able to use those skills when you need them the most. Mm-hmm. So we combine, my work is to combine the working through those emotional blocks alongside learning the skills to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's really well said. And I agree with everything that Julie just said. I would even echo and say that, when your nervous system is under hijack and your limbic system is in full alert mode, it means your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain, is shut down, and which is really what has happened with the high conflict personality. Yes. But you want to protect that for yourself so that you're thinking from a place of rationality and reason and being able to calm your own nervous system. So if you're too much in that person's space all the time, you can't get there because your brain is still in survival mode.
Is it true, Rebecca, that most of the time the women are the ones who are filing for divorce?
I wouldn't say that's true. I think it's both. I think it's probably equal. I don't know. I've never seen the statistics on that, but I think that it's definitely pretty equal from what I know.
That's used a lot. Like I've seen it before, kind of where like in the manosphere, the men are pretty adamant that the women, are the ones that are kind of focused on their self-interest the most. And like, I want to know from both of your perspectives, Rebecca, like, do you feel like that's the case where on average, you probably don't know for sure.
I would say the only thing I do want to say, obviously everybody's got their own perspective and interpretation about things, right? And so if it's the manosphere, they're going to say women or whatever. But the one thing I do want to clear up with regard to that is that there is this myth out there with regard to no fault divorce, and no fault does not mean fault never matters. It just means you don't have to prove fault in order to get a divorce. They're not making people stay married to each other. Years ago, you had to prove abuse or abandonment or adultery or things like that. And just to even get to a place of, are we going to let these people get divorced? Or are we going to make them stay together? And In the way that divorce court works is all you have to do is plead that it's irretrievably broken, or whatever the word is, the verbiage is in your particular state. And then now you can just get to the place of, how do we get this divorce? But fault matters all the time in divorce. I mean, try lying on the stand, try being an abusive parent, all those things are going to matter in divorce. I mean, if you've spend a ton of money on gambling or waste or drug abuse, all of those things are potentially recoverable in divorce. So I just caution people to go, oh, well, it's no fault. That means I just, everything just sucks for me, because that's not the case.
Julie, who's dragging their couple in to see you? Is it on average the wife or the husband?
I would say it's more accurately broken down between attachment styles, which I know I said earlier, we don't need to use those, but they're pretty accurate, especially when you are looking at the context of one partnership. And it's usually, I would say 95% of the time, the anxious partner is going to be the one pulling the avoidant partner in. Just because of the nature of how they do their own feelings. The avoidant partner is more likely, stuff it down. Let's just pretend there's no problem. If we don't face it, we'll avoid the heat. Let's just try harder, kind of vague things like that. And then the anxious partner, trust me when I say they have a whole host of other things that they're not doing, that are working so well. But the truth is that 75% of people with anxious attachment are female. And so it does end up that more typically it's the female bringing the male to therapy.
Mm-hmm. Is it true that we're kind of born with a type of attachment style, or I guess in the early days, like once you're born and then but then it can change based on who you're with?
We are not born with an attachment style at all. They are 100% relationally created. We are born with a need to have secure relationships. We're born with a need to have responsive emotional care from someone that we rely on to feel safe. So if we're born into a situation where we have a caregiver who cannot show up for us emotionally, we're left alone with our emotions, or our emotions get overwhelmed, or they're just punished, and this can happen, any age throughout childhood is when someone's most vulnerable. Then that person develops insecurity. It's in the context of two people. So when you're born, you're not in the context yet of two people. When you're in the womb, you're just you, for the, caveats to that. But it is 100% relational. And the good news about this is that, we create insecure attachment in relationship, and we can heal insecure attachment in relationship. Now, I do believe that there are people who have more of a biological kind of temperamental propensity with their insecure attachment, the feelings that they have of not being able to predict safety and responsiveness from another person. I do believe that some people have temperamental tendencies, or whatever the word is, to manifest that in a way that's anxious, where they're scared and they're nervous and they're reaching to try to close the distance, or they're protesting a lot to try to just hear me, just see me. That's the anxious attachment. And then another person, they're maybe more set up from birth to manifest that in avoidance, just stuff it down. If emotions aren't safe, if I'm not getting positive responses, just disconnect from them, don't ask, don't show it, or just, kind of get really defensive if someone does try to kind of confront you on something. I always like to tell a story that I have 6 children, and I have a set of twins, and 5 of my children were pretty chill babies. They didn't, they were just kind of happy, didn't cry excessively, just normal crying. But then Sophie, who was a twin, was just crying all the time. I mean, just nonstop crying. And so I just held her all the time. I just held her and gave her what she needed. She was fine when she was being held. I had to hold her and walk forward. That was the trick. Like, you couldn't just hold her and stand, you had to walk forward. So, I always say, look, her little nervous system needed more regulation than other babies. And so that's why she was crying, is her body was needing, her skin was needing more holding. So had I not been able to provide her with that because I didn't, know better or whatever, or just thought, well, babies have to cry it out, the odds are very high that she would have been the type to end up with an anxious attachment, because she wasn't going to shut it down. She was going to keep crying until those needs got met. And then, so another baby might just, they might just shut down their emotions and stop needing altogether, and not really stop needing. It just looks like not needing on the surface, but really they've just detached themselves from the need. Good news with that is that need can be reawakened later, even into adulthood, with the right type of help.
It sounds like the anxious attachment kind of has the hardest, or one of the hardest struggles in the courtroom, and then also relationally, at least on the outside, because they're kind of like, they're going to the judge like, oh, maybe he'll just understand me. And then they're seeing Julie and they're saying, well, he's a narcissist, instead of kind of focusing on like becoming more secure and then taking more self-responsibility first. They're too busy kind of expressing themselves and feeling hurt, understandably. Do you think that that's true? Or would you say like the more disorganized attachment is kind of the hardest? That one's a little bit strange, to me, like how to articulate the disorganized type.
Disorganized is definitely a much harder way to live. I mean, your feelings are more chaotic. At least with anxious attachment and avoidant attachment, there's some predictability there. And your feelings tend to be a little more consistent. With someone who is disorganized, their insides are all over the place, and they don't know what to do. A lot of times they are just exploding or going into a freeze because they're so overwhelmed. And these really the most, distressing piece of disorganized attachment is everybody is out to get them. If someone with an anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment, they grow up in what we call emotionally insensitive homes. Whereas someone with a disorganized attachment, they grow up in emotionally dangerous homes. So they really learn from a young age that people actually want to not just not show up for me, they actually want to hurt me. And that's what, when you were talking, Rebecca, earlier about the really difficult person, typically that's what you're dealing with, is everything is seen through the lens of this person is out to get me. So they have to scramble around and work overtime and put all of their energy into winning, because they're trying so hard to stay one step ahead of losing.
It's a really good way of putting it. I'm still recovering from the fact that you have 6 kids.
Yeah. 1 boy and 5 girls.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's a lot of estrogen.
I know, right? And they're all kind of, my oldest is now, I guess, kind of officially out of teenagerhood because she's 23, but there was a lot of years there where it was 5 teenage girls. And I'll tell you, nothing will teach you how to lean into someone's emotional experience like having teenage girls, especially.
Oh yeah.
So
I have 4 kids, but
oh, you do? Oh my gosh.
I do. I have 2 of each, but I have had 2 teenage girls, and we say the boys are harder at the beginning and easier later, and then the girls are the opposite, because the girls are, oh my goodness, they're wonderful now.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it worked out really well, but those were some hard days.
Yeah.
They're probably like super kids, both of you guys as kids, very like boundaried, self-expressive, loving. They probably
have to let them. You have to do a kids of guests show, and you can ask them.
Exactly, we'll bring them on. Yeah,
I would love that. I think everyone's on their phones and computers, and they kind of forget how to communicate. Like no one has their driver's license. Everyone's like, nobody knows how to even like pick up the phone and call. Everything is just like brief texts and
it's different. It's a different world for sure.
Do you think more people are, not your angel kids, but do you think more kids are growing up a little bit more narcissistic because of that? Or maybe, I don't want to say that word, but more just like not as empathetic or not able to kind of navigate the world as well because of this. And what do you guys think people could do from both of your perspectives who do have kids?
Mm-hmm. There is actually a book, I think it's called The Narcissism Epidemic, if I'm correct on that. And she said that the cases of NPD have increased, I think, 30% between the 1970s and 2010. Now, it could be the way they're measuring it, that they're measuring it. I mean, I think there's a lot that goes into it, but there certainly is an increase. And, I will say that I do think that, the phones and social media and all of that is definitely not helping. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think that using that word is appropriate, as a little n narcissism. It's tricky because that word, I think you said it, or one of you said it at the beginning, is it's just taken on so many meanings. But I do see, kind of an increase of, I want to say, like, antisocial and self-absorption. I mean, how do you not be? I mean, they go on the phone, and then they're just instantly bombarded with image and status and beauty and this and that. And it's like anybody feels insecure. And when people feel insecure, that's when they're going to become self-absorbed, because they're trying so hard to stay safe, and people who are self-absorbed just don't feel safe inside. So there's a lot coming at these kids. What I'm seeing is my kids are 24 down to 15 or 14. And they do seem to be kind of catching on. I don't know if it's just because my kids and I have these conversations, but they're catching on to how toxic all of this is. And I think they're starting to just kind of want to turn away from it. But I'll tell you what I've done with my kids that has been really tremendously helpful is I can't protect them from everything coming at them. But what I can do is I can teach them to be emotionally healthy around the stuff that's coming at them, and to teach them to manage those things in a healthy way. And that really starts with them being able to tap into their own bodies and do their own emotional work. And instead of seeing the person on Instagram that has the perfect hair and the perfect makeup and the perfect clothes, and then just kind of feeling insecure, and then going shopping. Now I'm going to go do some shopping so I can look as good as this person right now, to kind of relieve some of that stress. What I'm teaching them is, like, let's step in. What happens inside of you when you see this person? Is that when you kind of start to say, well, I'm not measuring up, I'm not enough? Where does that take you? Well, it's scary. Well, where does that, I mean, of course, these are many conversations repeated over the course of time, but where does that take you? Well, I would feel rejected if I'm not enough, and that's going to be lonely, and I don't want to feel that pain. And then by the time we start really getting in there and putting words to all of that stuff, that's really relieving a lot of the tension around that to begin with. And all of a sudden now, instead of them using shopping or whatever to go relieve some of that pain, they've just relieved it in a moment of connection, which is what they were looking for to begin with. Because that's what people are looking for when they're trying to be perfect, is to feel accepted and loved. And they're looking for the connection that they're not getting in real life. So my work is about, let's help people really start feeling fully connected on a deeper emotional level. And some of these symptoms will start to ease up.
Yeah, I like what you talk about a lot, because it does give some hope that you can kind of strengthen the relationships that you really care about. And then, Rebecca, you help us not get too hopeful and kind of remember to protect ourselves.
Yes.
Because I've been very naive before. It's my baseline to give the benefit of the doubt almost always, kind of how I was born, and I've always kind of been that way. So I think sometimes people maybe have to get through those experiences to then realize oh, they can have really close relationships, but they also need to have the right words to protect themselves too. And the dynamic is just unhealthy. It's not narcissistic. It's not this person is toxic. It's just, this is unhealthy for me. So now it just doesn't work. So I think both of your perspectives are really good. And I want to ask one more thing. Julie, you talk about kind of the relationship shouldn't be perfect. We shouldn't focus on, perfection. But do you think that most people have high standards or unrealistic expectations?
Well, I think that it depends on what those expectations are. I mean, everybody deserves emotional connection, emotional availability, and emotional comfort. And that, pretty much any pro relationship behavior is going to fall under one of those categories. So if that's your expectation, then that isn't unrealistic at all. In fact, that's wise, because that's what relationships are for. Ultimately, is for us to not have to do life together and for us to not have to be emotionally alone. I'm sorry, for us to be able to do life with a partner, to, have kids and have a family and build a life together. And then to not have to be emotionally alone, because life is hard. The world's harsh. We're going to feel emotionally hurt. We're going to lose people and lose parents and lose our jobs. And we're going to need support. That's what relationships are there for. And then we need, the physical connection, right? We rely on body connection. And so, if a relationship is in a distressed place where I'm not feeling my needs are being met around this stuff, that is not an unrealistic expectation at all. I mean, that's a wise expectation. What is an unrealistic expectation if you start to put, demands on other parts of life to get those needs met, which are really just a stand-in. Like, I need for you to say this exact thing to your mom when your mom says something to your sister behind my back. That is probably, we need to be talking about some other things around that before we go to, this is exactly how I have to, have you handle this, or controlling each other in ways, or you have to make a certain amount of money. I mean, if you go into a relationship saying, look, I want this certain lifestyle, and, there are financial things to consider, that there's nothing necessarily wrong with that at all. I mean, we all want to live our lives in the way we want to live them. But if you're controlling to the point of, well, my partner has to make, X number of dollars a year because I need to be able to live in the biggest house or afford the best car, without really considering the emotional nature of the relationship. And you're not really asking yourself, what does this big house and big car actually mean to me emotionally? What need am I looking to get met by having those things? That's when we start, getting into realistic, unrealistic. But the truth is too, that some people are already in relationships with people who aren't able to meet their emotional needs. That does not mean that expectation isn't reasonable. But we also have to recognize, just because we have an expectation doesn't mean that someone knows how or is willing to meet that expectation.
Rebecca, how do you think about this from an attorney point of view, having high expectations, or at least like good expectations, like say I'm like, oh, I would like good expectations for myself. I want to do right by this person, and vice versa, versus being unrealistic. Like, how would you help someone kind of navigate the difference, and then make peace with that?
I mean, managing expectations is like new attorney 101. I think that's something that new attorneys like really fall into a trap of, I'm going to promise you're going to get all these things. And then, then you end up, they're mad at the attorney if things don't go that way. So, I learned really early on about how to manage expectations for clients. Basically, like, here's your best case scenario, here's your worst case scenario. And it always has to be grounded in the law. And, if somebody comes in and says, I want 100% custody and I want 100% of the assets and I want their income to be signed over to me for the rest of their lives, well, that's not going to happen. So, there's got to be some understanding about managing expectations. And, one of the things that I say, when it comes to custody, for example, a lot of the mothers are like, oh, they've never changed a diaper. They don't even know where the school is. They've never taken them to a doctor's appointment. I should have more custody time. And they're not really happy when the courts are favoring 50-50. And how I manage expectations from that point of view is like, okay, well, you know what, if you start from the premise of like, there's 30 days in a month, 50-50 is 15. How many overnights do you think he should have? Because it's not going to be zero. It's not going to be zero. So it's going to be somewhere between 0 and 15. So what looks reasonable to you? Is it 5? Okay, how is that going to actually look? So we really get down into the nitty gritty of the goals, and you can take that for any kind of a case, frankly. I mean, if it's employer, employee, or if it's business partnership or whatever, like really get down into, okay, here's the law on this. And so that's what the judge is going to care about. And that's also where you're going to ground your leverage in, okay? Because if you go in front of a court, here's what you're going to ask for, and here's your chances of getting that. And so that helps to help you decide how to strategically make decisions in your case. And managing expectations is a huge part of it, because people want to feel whole. They want to be made whole. I signed on to be married forever. I didn't sign on to have a cheater who abuses me. So somebody's got to pay for this. And it's just that's not how it works. And so I think there's this myth out there that the court system is there designed to protect you. And it's not. That's not what it's. The job is to apply the law and move on. And there's a fundamental disconnect.
Yeah, I think that's good for people to realize that no one's going to come out to save you. And we're all kind of responsible for our own emotions and making sure we have healthy relationships. I think you guys are powerhouses and very smart women. And I was so happy both of you could come. I think everyone should get your book, Julie, and Rebecca, everyone should check out your app as well. I think that, utilizing AI and law is like the future. Definitely very cool that you're doing that. And I hope that you both come back again. Make sure you figure out what your relationship style is. What's your attachment style? Understand as much as you can, have healthy relationships, and, check out Rebecca as well to then figure out how to protect yourself once that you've done the first. So I hope you guys come again, and thank you so much for coming to the debate room.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Dana. It was great.